I'm very happy to see such a nice crowd out here today. This is the moving on to a series of candidate functions this is about the Office of the Attorney General. Today we have the incumbent, the Honorable Tom Horn. If you would stand and be recognized, please. And then we have the challenger, Mr. Mark Bernovich. Thank you. Just as far as ground rules, I want to give some very brief ground rules, please. Tommy Tucker is that wonderful song that he sung and with such power is going to be our timekeeper. So he's doing double duty. He's got his paddles ready. There will be no question and answer period after the 15 minutes that is allotted for each one of the candidates. And each candidate will be given approximately 15 minutes to speak. We also enjoy civil opportunities like this, so please no outburst. If there is, there will be given one warning and then we'll be asked to leave, please. But I want to give a little bit about what the Attorney General's office is about, and then I'll read the profile of our first speaker. I believe Tom Horn, that you're going to be first. Is that, you're going to go back to Mark? Okay. All right. Well, the Office of the Attorney General serves as the chief legal officer of the state. The Attorney General is mandated by our Constitution and elected to a 4-year term by the people of Arizona. The Attorney General's office represents and provides legal advice to most state agencies, enforces consumer protection and civil rights, prosecutes criminals charged with complex financial crimes and certain conspiracies involving illegal drugs. In addition, all appeals statewide from felony convictions are handed down by this office. The Child and Family Protection Division provides legal services to the Department of Economic Security, DES, including Child Protective Services, CPS, and Child Support Enforcement. The Attorney General's office brings and defends lawsuits on behalf of the state and prepares formal legal opinions requested by state officers, legislators, or county attorneys on issues of law. The Attorney General's office has jurisdiction over the Arizona's Consumer Fraud Act, white-collar crime, organized crime, public corruption, environmental laws, civil rights laws, and crimes committed in more than one country. Additionally, this office prosecutes cases normally handled by county attorneys when they have a conflict. The Attorney General's office is the largest law office in the state. Okay, so we're going to go for our first candidate, and again, this is Mr. Mark Bernovich, and this is a little profile I got off some of your social media, so I really trust it'll be right. Mark grew up in Phoenix and graduated from Arizona State University with a BS in political science, cum laude. He graduated from the law school at the University of San Diego and returned to his roots in Arizona after graduation. He met his wife Susan while they both worked as prosecutors for the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. Mark has served in the following capacities: the Attorney General's Office, Director of the Goldwater Institute's Center for Constitutional Government. He served as a Senior Director for the Corrections Corporation of America. He served as the Assistant United States Attorney. And then also the Director of the Arizona Department of Gaming. Mark and Susan have 2 children and 2 dogs. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by saying my apologies. I was running a little late and I wanted to make sure I didn't break the law, so I didn't want to have any sheriff bad views or any of the folks pull me over. So I was trying to stay within the speed limit, so I was running a little behind. So I apologize for being a little late. The other thing that struck me is, someone who grew up here in Arizona, it's amazing to me how much this state changes. And as I was driving by Schnepp Farms, I thought to myself, gosh, it seems like maybe, I don't know, last time I was there maybe 10 years ago or so, it seemed like it was in the middle of nowhere. And now there's so much more development that has sprung up. It's really a testament to the vibrancy and how special this Arizona is. And that's why I'm so blessed to grow up here and live here and want to give something back to our community. Now, I think the bio that Anthony read was essentially correct, but one thing he didn't add was for 6 years I started off my legal career as a deputy county attorney, including working in the gang and repeat offender bureau. In fact, I know if Barbara's here, her son Keith and I worked together in the county attorney's office for several years, and so that's the one thing about growing up here and working here is people know who you are, what you stand for, and what you believe when you're consistent in your convictions. So today, I've got about 15 minutes. I would love it if we originally talked about having a debate format, which I would love to do. I'm more than welcome to come back anytime, and I will be available for questions. And I don't know as far as the format, can I save any rebuttal time or anything? Or is it, okay, so I got straight 50, so I guess I better start talking. So let me give you a couple things today. What we're going to do is I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I want to tell you a little bit about why I'm running. I'll tell you a little bit about our priorities in the Attorney General's office. I do see that there's some cameras you're taping today, so that's great. Although I will say, I'm assuming the recording is available from the NSA. So in case anybody misses anything today, I'm sure the NSA will make it available. One of the things that I was thinking about running, I talked to several people I know, I trust, people in the community, people like County Attorney Bill Montgomery, who's endorsed me. And when I was talking to them about running, one of the things Bill said, I said, well, I'm not a politician, I've never run for office. Most of my career has been spent working with law enforcement, keeping our community safe. And he said, no, you should really do this, you need to do it. And I said, well, when I'm out there giving speeches, I'm not a politician, I'm not used to this stuff. He said, here, be yourself, be funny, but not too funny. So I don't know what that exactly means, but he said, start your speeches with a joke. So I'm going to start today, although I'm 5 minutes in, with a joke. So this is the only joke I know that probably is not offensive to anyone in this room. Okay, here's my joke. Ready? Barack Obama. That's it, that's the joke. I was either going to go with that one or what has 2 thumbs and loves Ronald Reagan? This guy right here. All right, so anyway, speaking of Ronald Reagan in his farewell address to us told us, don't be afraid to see what you see. What Ronald Reagan was telling us, and even in the context of what happened when tearing down or taking down the Soviet Union was, if you see something that you don't like or that you think's wrong, it's not enough to talk about it. You got to do something about it. Amen. And so very often in life, when I was growing up here, I remember one of my teachers told me, and there was a Native American proverb that said, have less thunder in your mouth and more lightning in your hands. Don't just talk, do. And so that's what's really, really important. If you look at my career, and Anthony touched on it a little bit, I've spent most of my career working with law enforcement, keeping our community safe. I've worked at the County Attorney's Office, the Attorney General's Office, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. As he also noted, I was the director of the Center for Constitutional Government at the Goldwater Institute. While at the Goldwater Institute, I wrote extensively about the importance of property rights, individual liberty. I authored amicus briefs on property rights issues that were signed off by people like the National Taxpayers Union. I also chaired, what you didn't mention, was the Governor's Privatization Commission. So it's not enough just to talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. And frankly, I had been the director of the Arizona Department of Gaming, which is a law enforcement agency. We have 35 sworn officers. And I enjoyed being the director of gaming. It's the agency that oversees the casino and gambling industry in Arizona. We had very good relationships working with our tribal partners to keep our communities, the tribal casinos, safe and well regulated. But we also aggressively pursued illegal gambling operations, including seizing illegal gambling devices for the first time in the agency's history. And also making sure that we were involved in investigating cases of illegal gambling that occurred off reservation. And frankly, we did less with more. If you look at what we did as far as the number of employees in our budget, we actually came in, last year I was director of gaming, under our appropriation. And we also reduced the size of the application from 11 pages to 6 while still making sure that we protected the public and the integrity of gaming. But as I said, I was very happy and content being the gaming director. But as I talked to folks that I knew, that I had worked with in law enforcement, all levels, federal, state, local levels, we were disappointed in what was happening. We felt like the Attorney General's office was getting headlines for the wrong reasons, not the right reasons. We needed someone that represented our Arizona values, that was going to make sure we did everything we could to not only keep our community safe, but could effectively do our jobs. And so I decided that it was time, with consultation with friends and family, that I would run for Attorney General. Now, it's not an easy thing to do. In fact, people will tell you that mathematically, taking on an incumbent in your own party is a fool's errand. But Vince Lombardi once said, stats are for losers. And if you feel like you have a moral obligation, or there's an obligation to do the right thing, then you have to do it. And so that's why I'm running for Attorney General, and I appreciate your support. When I'm Attorney General, there's 3 priorities we're going to have. One, since day one of this campaign, I've talked about the need to protect the most vulnerable people in our society. If you look at what's happening now, the reports are out about CPS, and not only child protective services, but adult protective services, protecting those vulnerable adults. You have to ask yourself, where was the Attorney General's office? As Anthony said in his opening, the Attorney General is the state's legal representative. He or she gives legal advice to those agencies. We need to make sure we have an Attorney General that's fully engaged, that's going to make sure that those cases are investigated and prosecuted, and CPS is getting the advice it needs to do its job. 2, we're going to make sure we do everything we can to work with county officials, with federal authority, with local authority, to make sure that everyone has the resources and the tools in their toolbox to aggressively pursue smugglers. Whether it's drug smugglers or human smugglers, one of the things that we've talked about in our campaign is that when you look at what's going on with like sexual trafficking, I mean, I have 2 daughters, and when you see or you hear these stories, you go to places like the Dream Center in Phoenix, you see these 15 and 16-year-old girls, it breaks your heart. We cannot tolerate that in our community, and we need to do everything we can to aggressively pursue those that are involved in smuggling, those cartels that are smuggling drugs, human beings. And I'm worried. I ask you, what is it going to be tomorrow? Is it going to be weapons of mass destruction? Is it going to be something else that could harm our community even far worse? And so we need to make sure that we're working with the local communities, the local law enforcement, state law enforcement, to aggressively pursue those types of cases. 3rd, the Attorney General, I'd like to say, he or she holds the sword of justice, correct? That means that you have the responsibility of, you can take away people's livelihoods, their life, their liberty, their property. You can affect their occupation. In fact, that's why historically, sworn peace officers and prosecutors were always held to a higher standard, because they wielded that sort of justice. But the other thing that sometimes doesn't get talked about enough is when you're the Attorney General, you also hold that shield of sovereignty. What does that mean? As Anthony touched on in the opening, the Attorney General is the state's attorney. He exists to assist. He or she represents the state and its interests in the courtroom. It's not something that you pick and choose. It's something you have to do. So when cases come up, for example, like the voter ID law, you have an obligation to do everything you can to defend those types of statutes, because you have to. But at the same time, there's discretion within the office of the Attorney General. When you wield that shield of sovereignty, you have to pick and choose what battles you're going to fight against the federal government. You know, the framers of our Constitution envisioned a federalist system where not only were there checks and balances between the various branches of the federal government, but there was checks and balances with the states designed to be a check on the federal government. And you see that clearly in things like readings like Federalist 46 from James Madison. And so, when I'm Attorney General, we are going to make sure we do everything we can to fight back against federal encroachment on our state sovereignty. And what do I mean? Now, I know there have been issues. There's been times, for example, when the Attorney General joined Eric Holder in the Obama administration to take on or stop the merger between U.S. Air and American Airlines. Now, I'm on record, it was on our website, I was opposed to that. I didn't think that was a great use of resources. Instead, what I would do is I would focus our energies on fighting back against federal encroachment on our sovereignty in instances such as the overuse of executive orders by the Obama administration. Now, some of you may have seen this recently, but if you saw, or I didn't listen to the State of the Union, but if you read the Wall Street Journal or any major publication, you can see headlines about the president attempting to assert unilaterally authority through executive order what he can't do legislatively. And I think everyone in this room appreciates that not only is that wrong, it's unconstitutional. So what's happening in Washington right now, and no disrespect to any of the congressional candidates here, but we have a problem where people are spending money we don't have on things we don't need, and they're shredding the Constitution, the 10th and 9th Amendments in the process. And so when I'm Attorney General, we're going to fight back. And I will give you a few more instances. Right now, the town of Tombstone, Arizona, is fighting to secure its water supply. It's in a fight with the Federal Bureau of Land Management. You know who's representing the town of Tombstone, Arizona? The Goldwater Institute. I asked, where's the Attorney General when Arizonans are desperately trying to fight their water supply? You know, Mark Twain once wrote that whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. Anybody that's been a rancher or a farmer out here in Arizona or out west appreciates the value of water, and we cannot leave it up to the whims of the Obama administration and the federal government to secure our water supply. But of course, there's more. One of the most troubling things that's going on right now in this country is federal overreach in an attempt to take over 1/6 of our economy. I'm sure you're aware that through the Affordable Health Care Act, better known as the Obamacare, there's an attempt to not only take over 1/6 of the economy, but Democrats themselves are finally realizing that it's a train wreck, that you aren't going to be able to keep your insurance, you're not going to be able to keep your doctor choices. And so at the end of this year, there was 11 Republican Attorney Generals, and this is available online, you can Google this, that sent a letter to Secretary Sebelius, the Obama administration, saying that what you're doing with the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, is unconstitutional. And we, as Attorney Generals of these states, are concerned about two overwhelming issues. One, the lack of privacy and security in these Obamacare rollouts. And two, the unconstitutional, on-the-fly attempts to change federal law. You can't do that with a pen and a phone, as the President said. You've got to do that through legislative action. I always like to say that if you don't like the statute, you change the statute. You don't just unilaterally disobey the law or not follow the law. Because after all, we're a nation of laws. We believe in the rule of law. That's what separates us from the third world dictators. I once heard Justice Scalia at an event. I'm a member of the Federalist Society. I heard Justice Scalia talking to a group of us. And he was explaining that every third world tin pot dictator in the world, even the old former Soviet Constitution, talked about rights of people and freedom of the press and speech. But what makes America so great and different is we have the separation of powers, and we believe in the rule of law. And when people break the law, they are held accountable. And that's what we need to make sure happens. And that means even if you're the President of the United States, then if you're doing something that's unconstitutional, you should be held accountable. The most disappointing part about this letter, that if you read these 11 signatures from Republican Attorney Generals, Arizona's not on here. Now, I'm not sure why. Like I said, this isn't a debate or rebuttal today. But if I have the chance, I would like to know why. Is it because of the distractions of the legal and ethical problems? Or is it because it's not a priority? I'm not sure. But my promise to you is if you vote for me, I will make sure I'm engaged as an Attorney General 100% of the time. I will dedicate all of my work days to making sure that I'm doing everything I can to represent Arizona values and Arizona interests. And at the end of the day, you know, the way I was brought up is I'm not going to do the wrong thing. I'm not going to embarrass the state. And the most important thing to me is I wake up every morning, just like today, praying that I am the husband my wife deserves and the father my kids need. And I think it's important for all of us to give something back to the community. And one of the other things, Anthony, you mentioned, I've also served as a member of the Army National Guard. I was an officer in the reserves as a JAG. And we have an obligation to leave this a better place than we found it. We have an obligation to leave Arizona a better place than we found it. And so with your help and your support, my pledge to you is that's what I promise to do. So please, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. And next is Mr. Tom Horn. He's the incumbent. Tom Horn was elected to the Arizona's Attorney General in 2010. Before coming, the AG was the attorney in private practice for more than 30 years. During that time, he also served as the Special Assistant Attorney General, Superior Court Judge Pro Tem, and the Court of Appeals Judge Pro Tem. Tom has served in every branch of the government. In the executive, he was the State Superintendent of Schools and the Attorney General. In the legislative, he was in the state legislature. Judicial, as Judge Pro Tem, and local on the school board. Tom has been married to his wife Marty for more than 40 years. They have 4 children. He received his graduate degree magna cum laude from Harvard College and his JD with honors from Harvard Law School. Please welcome the Honorable Tom Horn.
Thank you. My joke, since I used to be superintendent of schools, is a quiz. What do lawyers use for birth control? Personality. In listening to Mark, I was struck really by how much we really agree. When Obama lost a majority in Congress, he started to rule by executive fiat, with executive orders. And there's a word for that, and it's not democracy, it is not representative republic. And the line of defense against that kind of federal overreach is the 10th Amendment. Many of you remember the 10th Amendment provides those powers not expressly given to the federal government are reserved to the state respectively or to the people. And the line of defense on the 10th Amendment are the state attorneys general. And because Arizona has been on the forefront of many of these issues, I have been, and as long as I'm in public office, I will continue to be a strong defender of the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution.
Yes.
So let me give you some examples. Some of you may remember when Obama tried to get card check through Congress. This is where instead of having the right to a secret ballot in labor union elections, the union leaders could go around and intimidate the workers. If they sign the card and they get a majority of signatures by intimidation, then they become the representative. And he couldn't get it through Congress. And 4 states, one of which was Arizona, passed constitutional amendments saying that workers had a constitutional right to a secret ballot in their union elections. And the National Labor Relations Board, which is appointed by Obama, sent letters to the 4 attorneys general, one of which was Arizona, saying that this was contrary to their policy because they were for card check, and if we didn't agree not to enforce the amendments that our voters passed, they were going to sue us. Well, the 4 attorney generals, of which I was one, sent a common letter back saying we would not be intimidated, we were going to enforce the laws passed by our voters, and if they sued us, we would find the courthouse and we would defend ourselves. Well, they promised to sue all 4 states, but when the time came, they only sued one. Guess which one?
Arizona.
Arizona. So it became my honor to defend the right to a secret ballot of workers in their union elections, not just in Arizona, but for the entire country. And I got summary judgment. They didn't appeal, and I have established the right of workers in labor union elections to a secret ballot in their elections. I'll give you another example. The Environmental Protection Agency. Now, a lot of times the worst things that Obama has done are not the high-profile things that you read about, but his appointments to these various boards and what they do. The Environmental Protection Agency established a policy of sue and settle, where extreme environmentalist groups would sue, they'd go into a back room and make a settlement. The states who have a lot at stake were not part of the process. They'd go to a federal judge and get an order, and then they would go and they'd say, okay, we have a federal order, we can impose these unreasonable requirements on the states. We tried to find out about this process. We find out there was a secret email account. When we demanded the records of it, they refused it, and I've joined 11 other attorneys general to sue to get access to those email accounts to find out about the sue and settle policy. In the meantime, what did that mean for Arizona? They came to Arizona and they told our utilities they had to spend $500 million on equipment, and when they spend $500 million, our rates go up because we're the ones that have to pay for it. Right. That was not for a health standard, it was for a visibility standard. And the amount of visibility they got for that $500 million was so slight that you cannot see it with the human eye. The Environmental Protection Agency measures these things with something called deciviews. It takes 1 deciview to be able to see the difference if you're a human being. Some animals can see more, but if you're a human being, it takes 1 deciview. For this $500 million, they get a half deciview. So I appealed that decision to the 9th Circuit, and I will, if necessary, appeal it to the United States Supreme Court and argue it in the United States Supreme Court because we have to put a stop to this irrational federal regulation and federal overreach. Now, talking about the United States Supreme Court, I personally argued 2 cases to the United States Supreme Court last year. The first one involved a brutal murder, where a husband and wife went out to celebrate the husband's promotion with their 10-year-old son. They came back earlier because The Wizard of Oz was on TV. The 10-year-old wanted to see The Wizard of Oz. The front door was open. The husband went in to see what was happening. The next thing the wife knew, she saw him on the floor with a burglar on top of him, stabbing him repeatedly. The burglar was on probation at the time. He had violence in his past. He was found to be a violent person and got the death penalty. And 18 years later, justice had still not been done. And there are studies that show that if justice is done in a reasonable time, that can help in the healing process. And if these people are victimized, the families of the victims are victimized a second time by the federal courts by not letting them get justice, then that adds to their suffering. And I had a bad weekend where on Friday night I spoke to survivors of children killed in violent crime, and Saturday night I spoke to survivors of police officers killed in violent crime. And I got a lot of resonance when I talked about compressing the time period between verdict and execution in capital cases for the most brutal murders, because they need to see justice done. I heard about their traumas, about family breakup and alcoholism and divorce because of the trauma imposed on them by these terrible crimes. So I took this case to the United States Supreme Court because the Ninth Circuit put an indefinite hold because the prisoner was not, his mental state had deteriorated to the point where he couldn't help this lawyer with the habeas corpus proceeding. That's the federal proceeding by which they have helped hold up our state court actions. And I made two arguments. Number one, in almost all habeas cases, including this one, you don't have a new trial. It's an argument on the record. So the lawyer could read the record. He didn't need the help of the prisoners. And in those few cases where you do need the help of the prisoner because there will be a new trial, the stay should be temporary and not permanent. The United States Supreme Court agreed with me on both points. They overturned the Ninth Circuit unanimously. So I got not only the conservatives, but I got Sotomayor and Kagan and Breyer and Ginsburg, and unanimously overruled the Ninth Circuit, putting a limitation on the extent to which federal courts could interfere with our enforcing our state court judgments. The second case I argued was a case because we passed Proposition 200 that said if you register to vote, you should give evidence of citizenship. It seems like common sense. The Ninth Circuit told us that we were not allowed to do that because there's a federal form and the voters can choose when they register either a state form, the overwhelming majority use a state form, or if they use a federal form, the provision is if you sign, that's sufficient because you don't have to give evidence of citizenship. Merely signing saying you're a citizen, well, if you're willing to vote fraudulently, you're willing to sign falsely. So I took that case to the United States Supreme Court, and the United States Supreme Court said it's true that the federal law says all you need to do is sign, but, and I can almost know this passage by heart, they said Arizona is correct in stating that it is of questionable constitutionality for the federal government to tell the states that they cannot get the information necessary to determine that their voters are qualified. So they sent us to the Election Assistance Commission to get a state-specific requirement, and if we couldn't get that, we could go to district court to make our constitutional argument. That's what we're doing now. Based on that language of the United States Supreme Court, we're going to win that case, and we're going to establish the principle that if you're going to register to vote in Arizona, you're going to show evidence of citizenship, and only citizens are going to vote in Arizona, and not illegal aliens. I took over an agency which, under my predecessor, had a reputation for forcing unfavorable compromises on state agencies because they didn't have enough experienced lawyers to go to court and fight. And so I brought a number of experienced lawyers with me, and I decided I would be a role model. So I have personally argued in the state superior court, in the Arizona State Supreme Court, in federal district court, in the Ninth Circuit, and as I mentioned, the United States Supreme Court, to send a message to the lawyers in our office that we will not force unfavorable settlements on state agency. We are hungry to go to court and fight for the people of Arizona. Now, let me just mention a couple of issues that Mark mentioned, which I think we're really in agreement on. First of all, child protection. My philosophy has been don't leave children in dangerous situations. And so since I took office for 3 years, the number of children under court protection has gone from 11,000 to 16,000 with no increase in appropriation. So our lawyers are working very hard because we are determined to protect children. Secondly, with respect to drug smugglers, I actually changed the I changed the priorities in our budget so that we have worked with federal and local law enforcement to dismantle drug smuggling operations. We started out with one that had a monopoly on the Tono Indian Reservation. We arrested a bunch of people, we dismantled that one, and since then we have dismantled 14 separate drug smuggling operations. You can read about it on my website, elect Tom Horn. You get the details on the 14 different drug smuggling operations that we have dismantled since I took office in the Arizona Attorney General's office. Third, with respect to child sex trafficking, there's a lot of talk about it now, but 3 years ago, I co-founded and am the co-chair of the task force against child sex trafficking. And we've been working very hard to educate the public and to bring about stronger laws for tougher penalties for people who engage in child sex trafficking. With respect to the airline measure, one of the responsibilities of the Attorney General is antitrust, to prevent mergers that are contrary to competition. The free enterprise system flourishes with competition. As a result of being in that case, I was able to get concessions that they would maintain all the routes that they have now, that they would maintain Phoenix as a hub, and by being involved, the letter didn't get to my desk until he had already sent the letter, but I have signed on with Pat Morrissey, and we are part of that complaint. And in fact, the first decision that I made as Attorney General was to join the lawsuit to declare Obamacare unconstitutional, and that turns out to be a good decision. One of my priorities has been consumer protection, and so we've had sting operations, where, for example, we put a little camera in the hood of the car, we have a bad fuse, and so we're able to photograph what they're doing. They find electricity's not getting to the compressor, they take out the bad fuse, they put in a good fuse that works perfectly, they put a bad fuse back in, and then they tell our guy he needs to spend $700 on a new compressor that he doesn't really need, and that costs them $30,000. And with our sting operations, we are helping to protect everybody. My predecessors didn't do it because it doesn't involve a lot of money. Attorneys General usually like big multi-million-dollar complex cases. But even though these cases don't involve a lot of money, by our pursuing them, the word gets out, and people are tempted to cheat you, will hesitate because they know the next person in the door might be from the Attorney General's office. And so we are doing that because we think it makes life better for everybody if people who might cheat you don't know whether or not there's a sting operation coming from the Arizona Attorney General's office. And if you want to read about, how many of you get my newsletter? Raise your hand if you get my newsletter. Have you found those to be useful? So those that would like to get on my list, Margaret's got a form there that you can sign up on to get our newsletter. If you don't want to rely on the Arizona Republic for your news, sign up for our newsletter, and I think you'll find it interesting what we do in the Arizona, and Margaret will go around afterwards. I also want to show off our bumper sticker. We have an invention here whereby we die cut the back, so you take a strip off the top and the bottom, and then there's very little adhesive because you leave the paper in the middle, so they're guaranteed to come off without leaving any mark on your card. So if anybody would like a bumper sticker, let Margaret know, and she'll give you a bumper sticker. I also want to let you know what we've been doing for seniors in consumer protection. Because what we've done is, I set up something called the Task Force Against Senior Abuse, TASA, and there's a centralized phone number that you can call. It's 602-542, which is the Capital Exchange, 2400, 2100, 2124, you got it. 2124. And actually, despite the fact I just had a slip, it's an easy number to remember because 21 is the drinking age, and 24 is what the drinking age should be. So now you'll all remember that phone number, and then when you call there, they put you on to somebody in the relevant section. So there's a senior abuse specialist in access fraud, and there's a senior abuse specialist in our criminal fraud section and outreach section and so on. And so they'll put you on. We've had over 2,000 calls where people have called in with evidence of senior abuse. That has been passed on to the relevant people who pursue it because seniors are targets for fraud because they have their life savings, and sometimes they're more vulnerable, and so we put a big emphasis on protecting our seniors. I was given the 20-second mark, so thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Let's give one final applause to both Republican candidates, please. I believe at this time, in order to continue with the program, we wanted to take a short recess. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you all for being here for the for our candidates today. And we will take a short recess before we continue with our PCRC mandatory meeting. While everyone is still here, I did want to make a special announcement. One of our PCs won a special award at the Arizona Republican Party Awards Banquet. This is an award for Outstanding Party Worker in the State, and this was presented to Karen Wall, who is, I believe, here today. Thank you, Karen, for all the hard work that we do. Wanted to, all you candidates out there, you need to connect up with people like this. Also, we had one other state award, which went to the best rookie PC of the year for the state of Arizona. And that went to Ashley Pritchard, our webmaster, for all of his hard work. So, anyway, just want to announce those while you're all still here. And again, we'll take about a 10-minute recess, and then we will reconvene for our mandatory meeting. One last reminder that we have coffee over here on the side, but there's coffee out in the lobby, but that's not ours. That's for the residents of the community here. So please don't take coffee from the lobby. If you want coffee, take it from the side. And thank you again, Mr. Horn and Mr. Brnovich. Thank you very much for being here. And we'll reconvene in a few minutes.